Go for it, Ming. I'm gonna step out and I'm gonna let you kind of do your thing. We had Ming and I co-taught this class a week or two ago, and everyone hated us teaching together. We talked over each other. So I'm stepping out. I'm gonna let you take over, Ming, and then
Well,
Neil,
I
you you
mean,
you can you can throw in too, but like I'm gonna do real good to do my best not to step on you. So it's all you, Ming.
okay, I appreciate it. So, but I do like for you to stay in and you can
Yep.
interject anytime you want. All right, I'm just gonna start the mastermind today with our form changes. So for a lot of agents, as we go into new year, we're kind of apprehensive about, with the NAR lawsuit and what it means for us. And so I'm just gonna recap. I'm not doing a whole series on this because there's actually a 3-hour CE for our form changes for 2025. And Neil, you can chime in if you like, on some of the stuff because Neil has gone with, us to, do a trainer. So, but anyways, I am trying to share the screen, so.
Ming, I would just like to say I don't want to interject much. I'm going to let you take it. But when I've taught the class, the way I've opened up is let the class know that please know what we're having this morning is not a debate. We're not here to discuss the
Yeah.
why, because it was hard. It trained the trainer. I bit my tongue a lot, but a lot of people didn't, and they ended up like beating a dead horse. They kept going over stuff, and it's like we're not here to try to change things. We're
We're not
here.
here to address unique issue. Honestly, if you have a
Mhm.
unique issue, you need to talk to your broker about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So my biggest thing is just an overview of what has been changed. So the 259, which was highly recommended use for a buyer compensation, has been revised from a amend to basically it to buyer broker compensation because honestly, the selling agents already got their compensation secure with the seller, so this is not an issue readdressing the selling agent, but readdressing the buyer compensation. So, anyways, we changed that. Special step 302 amend to address concern as notice to terminate. How many times have you guys basically sent an ATAC amendment to address concern and don't hit crickets are chirping? Nobody's responding. So what this amendment is effective is making sure that if nobody responded, if these are items non-negotiable for the buyer, then this amendment serve as notice to terminate if seller refused to respond. A couple housekeeping items, which is seller broker notice to unrepresented buyer, because we have a lot of changes in reference to, well, if I'm not represented buyer, how am I getting compensated? And how do I do this legally within our lawsuit? So these are the forms that JR has come out and provided. One is seller broker notice to unrepresented buyer, showing agreement. I'm not going over these forms. I just want you guys to know it's available, okay? And if you have any questions, please consult your broker about this. Buyer broker notice to seller of seller obligation regarding lead-based paint. And seller's broker notice to seller and seller obligation. The only time you will use that, you probably won't hardly use it, just so you know, unless you do an assignment. Then the assignee will have to give notice to the end user in reference to the lead-based paint. So anytime buyer, broker, or agent is being compensated, guess what? The lead-based paint now on second page has an initial but a buyer broker to do. So therefore, we actually have to give a notice to the selling agent. Remember, notice received by selling agent is good, is same as notice to seller, okay? The buyer broker has to give to the seller agent. And we also now, the GAR has created a visitor sign-in sheet and disclaimer. And the reason being, there's oftentimes people walk into a home on open houses or what have you, and let's say if they tripped and fell. All right, this is a disclaimer. Basically, you can't sue me. Okay, and same thing. Let's see, the next one are viewing a house under construction, same principle. There are nails that if you drive your vehicle up there too close to the job site, you may get a hole punched because of nail or what have you. You cannot sue a new construction for. Next one's application for reasonable accommodation or modification. This came out because ADA, American Disability Act, okay? And so this is more for rental purposes. So F 935, 36, and 37 are all dealing with ADA, okay? If you take a minute to look at it, if you don't understand that, once again, just consult your broker. And also this customer brochure, the CB is always customer brochure 29. What buyer sell realtor needs to know about buying agricultural land and land near military bases. This came from federal last year during mid-year term. So basically, no foreign national or foreign entity, non-US citizen, can buy an agriculture land 10 mile near the military institution, okay? We're not talking about residential homes, we're talking about agricultural land, okay? So other than that, that is pretty much the major changes. I'm gonna skip over to some of the other stuff. Here it is. Anytime you have instruction for signature on party's legal entity, you have to put, if the buyer sells legal entity, for example, Mary Jane, executor for Bill Jane, okay? You have to put their title as a signator, okay? Otherwise, this may be a amendment down the road again. So let's try to do things right first time. So we had to go back and redo everything, okay? You can't actually put that on your authentic sign remind. You can put the entity name. And when you do a signature part, it'll be Mary Jane, President, Mary Jane, Management, Manager, Mary Jane, whatever their title is for that entity or that administration or trustee, okay? So one thing, let's talk about the compensation. Really, there's not a whole lot of change on the seller, except in here. The section 4A4C, whether compensation is paid to buyer broker. So now with, a lot of us know that EXP has not, has their own form. They don't even discuss compensation to buyer's broker. And hopefully in their consultation, they do discuss the potential buyer's broker asking for their fees. So once again, in here, in the seller brokerage agreement, if you're the selling agent for the seller now has the option to not initially offer, but market the seller is open receiving offer which seller pays compensation, okay? Or they can say compensation is being paid by seller's broker, either by the seller themselves or by the co-op, okay, seller's broker, okay? So the first box will be directly from the seller. The second box will be directly from the seller's broker, okay? Most of the time, those are the two most common. If you go in third, that is a special step. So if you are structuring it uniquely, consult your broker once again on how you want to structure this compensation, okay? Or the seller can say, no compensation is being offered, okay? The seller has every right because this is an agreement between the seller and seller agent. Has nothing to do with the buyer broker at all or buyer agent. So with that said, once again, this is why we have F-259 exhibit that asks for the compensation upfront, okay, for the benefit of the buyer. That's how you keep it legal, because in the past, the way we did it was that seller paid 3% of compensation or commission back then to the buyer broker. So with that, the way that sentence is structured is a contingency, not for the benefit of the buyer. Okay, the way we structure it now is for the benefit of the buyer, not a contingency. Okay, that's special step 620. If you guys have not taken the 2025 GAR contract, please look at our the website and see who's being offered. And some of us teach virtually, some of us teach live. So depend on your style, do attend to one of those. Okay. So this form is revised in compliance with NAR. Okay, so with that said, that's all I'm gonna cover on the seller section, because there's a couple other things that when you take the class, you'll see more detail what it means. I'm skipping over through this whole slide, so excuse me for 1 minute. One thing we did talk about, lead base, okay? Right here, I know it's a little small for you guys, but in the past, this is where the selling agent would initial, where they inform the seller of the lead-based paint requirement. Now, anytime buyer agent's being compensated directly from the seller, this is not co-op, directly from the seller, they need to initial in this box and make sure you send that notice. Okay, that notice is, and here's a bigger picture of that section right there. Okay, and the notice is 317 buyer broker notice. This only requires your signature, buyer's agent, and just a notice. It's unilateral, it's not mutual. So you only given notice and given to the seller agent is sufficient. All right, with that said, let's go over some of the buyer agreement. One of the biggest change is customer acknowledgement for customer, brokerage agreement for clients, and other changes, same as seller brokerage agreement in reference to, well, once again, when you take this class, we'll go over a little more detail, but I just want to hit the meat on this one here, okay? So in 7/1/2024, this is the old format where remember I was taught 3% as a minimum, or 3 bananas, whatever it is that you charge. It can be 2.5 bananas, 2 bananas, whatever it is. And in section 4B. Now in section 4C is what I said, hey, this is your maximum. What that means is that this can include your commission and what have you. Guess what? The AR settlement, because it was such a hurry and coming up with the form after it's published, there's some revision once again. And like I said, this is not a discussion of what we should be doing on a national level or what have you. This is about compliance. This is about staying in true of what we're doing so we don't get sued in the future for the same thing. Okay. Will this form change as it progresses mid-year? Absolutely, because this is one of the biggest benefit for being a realtor, because you have folks that really care about our industry and that believes in our industry, this is all they do. And so therefore, they're gonna tell you what is going on with the market, versus what is theoretically they thought should be done, okay? Theoretically and actual, two different things. And so we want to make theory come to compliance with actual. So normally that's why the revision in mid-year. So I highly recommend you guys take the mid-year changes as well. So let's look at the new form, okay? So where we have minimum maximum last year, and this year also let me skip back over here real quick. In section D, it talks about where if a seller, broker, or seller's paying you directly, it reduces the compensation the buyer has to the buyer's broker on the first box. In the second box, it does not reduce. So what that means is buyers obligate to you whatever your minimum compensation here is, regardless whether or not seller's paying you or not. So a lot of folks, after it came out, NARC, you can't do that, okay? Because we got to make sure that we are reducing the fee dollar per dollar. You cannot charge buyer on top of what you're getting from the other side, because you're negotiating for your compensation, and yet you're saying that compensation doesn't apply. So why are you negotiating for the buyer if it's not reduced dollar per dollar? So that was one of the biggest change that we have made as well. So basically, buyer brokerage is an agreement between buyer and you. Doesn't matter what happens. The buyer's obligated to pay you that minimum compensation that they agree. Okay. So therefore, if you're able, part of your consultation with your buyer is that My job is to negotiate the fee structure into the contract. Okay. And before it's binding, everybody knows who's paying who. And so buyer has to understand what obligation they truly have before binding. And that's where it hits. Okay. So here we go. The way the buyer brokerage agreement is written is where the buyer broker is compensating, the buyer is being compensated by the buyer. All right, whatever the percentage banana you want to charge, that's all you can get, period. You cannot say, well, this is the percentage I charge of banana I charge, but the sellers offer more. Okay, so before you go binding on this contract, you need to amend your brokerage agreement to allow you to receive the extra compensation or commission or bonuses with new constructions, because we know we're going to run into that issue as we progress this year. Okay, you just have to amend your brokerage agreement prior to getting that contract binding or around the same time, because you can't really negotiate for your compensation if you don't have an agreement with the buyer on what you're getting. And that was one of the NAR lawsuit settlement, that we had to be very transparent about our compensation. So therefore, there's no more minimum or maximum. There's no more ranges. There is a set amount, period. Okay. And so possible payment of compensation by seller broker. I don't know any buyer would not direct us to get their obligation to the buyer agent reduced. Okay. Meaning they direct us to seek to get seller broker to pay our compensation. There's very few times I will see, rarely, if it's second box, get checked, meaning that they don't care if the seller's paying compensation, they're going to pay you directly. That's going to be a rare one. Okay. And also, if you look at this section E, we actually make sure we disclosure regarding broker compensation. Buyers shall be obligated to pay all of the broker compensation not paid by seller or seller broker. This is why we need buyer brokerage agreement prior to showing, because there's an obligation that the buyer is committed to you and vice versa. Okay, so therefore, we have to have our brokerage agreement prior to any showing. So, and if you look at this right here, the special step in here, any contribution to seller or seller broker toward buyer compensation and buyer ability to fulfill its compensation obligation. Buyer should not make any offer to buyer or accept any counter in a contract to purchase that will result in buyer paying more of the broker compensation than buyer can afford. Okay, so the language has changed. So we're basically saying transparency upon selling of the property. Alan, you got a question?
I guess more a statement than a question, really. I think one of the big, every time we teach this, we get so many questions about, can we do bonuses from the builders anymore? And the answer is, yes, no, maybe. And what I mean by that is, like, if you, NAR has interpreted the settlement to state that, our compensation has to be negotiated upfront. And so and how Seth has interpreted it, as well as the forms committee, is that if you're going to get a bonus, you need to be ready to validate what you did to get that bonus. Basically what they're saying is, look, you're not going to be protected if you like you're going to open yourself up for potential liability here if you take a bonus for no reason other than the fact that you didn't do anything. You just got a bonus. Why wouldn't that, and from their point of view and from the attorney's point of view, like why wouldn't the bonus go to the buyer? Why would the bonus go to you instead of to the buyer? Well, if you did something extra to earn a bonus, then at that point you have the right and the ability to say, look, this is what I did, or new construction clients take a lot more time, a lot more of my time. So I got a bonus because for whatever reason it may be. Um, they're not saying you can't do it, but they have taken the ability for us to write it into our buyer brokerage agreements in advance because the buyers are on the hook for all the compensation up front. If you write in a bonus, well, then that buyer is on the hook for the bonus
Your bonus,
from the very beginning.
yeah.
Exactly. And so we're not saying that you can't amend brokerage agreements, but that's really our only recourse at this point. I also want to state that this is not mine and Ming's necessarily. This is not our how we would have written the contracts. We're not like you know what, this is what we think, but this is the contracts that we have. Um,
Well, the
personally,
contract was written to be in compliance. Once again, like Neil's opening, we're not here to discuss,
yeah,
you know, a
yeah,
specific situation. We're here to discuss about being compliant to practice in this industry. So whether or not you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter at this point. And I know it sounds awful, but there's definitely a way around it. I do recommend you consult with a broker when you gonna make the adjustments on buyer brokerage agreement. Anytime like new construction, if you're gonna amend the brokerage agreement to include the bonuses, make sure you include the property address. Because it'll only apply to the property, so the buyer's not obligated in case this one falls through to pay you a bonus on the next property. So anytime rebates or additional money, make sure it's property specific because it is addressing that exact property, not overall.
yeah. I mean, I think it's silly to say that we can only negotiate our compensation down. I think if we have the rights, the ability, I think, and we have all negotiated our compensation and taken less compensation. And so if we can take our compensation down, then by the same token, we should be able to negotiate our compensation up. But this was no one got our approval on this. So, as far as that goes, I'm with you on there.
We're
I just
just
wanted
one
to kind
of
of interject
52
that, Meg.
states.
So, yep. All right.
So,
Thank
but
you.
once again, we don't want you to think it's the end of the world. It's not. There's always a workaround, y'all. And please understand that we're here to provide that service for our agents. So please don't think about that this is gonna change again in mid-year. That's what I'm trying to telling you. Everything, just so you know, the NAR lawsuit was approved, but guess what? They're appealing it. So what that means right now, we're just practicing compliance and hoping that the current administration will make this kind of go away, so to speak. It depends on how the environment is in this coming administration will determine whether or not the appeal will go through or not. But even if the appeal goes through, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we still got practice with transparency. And that's all NAR is trying to do right now, is to make sure that we're practicing transparency so these attorney won't go after our industry down the future. All right. So once again, let's talk about Form 259 really quick. All we did is change the title up here in 2024. We changed the date line, and 2025 is more specific. And also, sorry. Um, so in here it says seller signature. So anytime seller is paying you directly to the buyer, you gotta have the seller signature. If it's co-op, it's not required. Okay, so once again, anytime seller, so this is where you guys gotta have a great communication with the selling agent to see who's actually compensating you for your compensation as party agreement. The F-258, I'm not sure if you guys are using a whole lot of that. I don't like that form for two reasons, and this is personal opinion, okay? if you are asking a seller to give you a compensation of 3 bananas. Put yourself in seller's shoes because sellers are now more informed, right? Why would I give you our carte blanche on an offer I haven't even seen yet? Yes, you can absolutely ask me for it, but I want to see the offer before I just blindly agree to it. So therefore, 258, a lot of agents say, well, I'm not gonna show property if it's not, doesn't have any compensation in it. There's multiple ways you guys can negotiate, just so you know. Just because the list price that says you can't, doesn't mean you can't move the list price up to include compensation if you're gonna ask for it. Or if the house is in the market over 90 days, do you not think the seller might be more motivated at this time? So therefore, there's a lot of conditions, not one size fits all. But I'm just telling you, you can negotiate differently. It's not the traditional, here's a contract, here's my 3%, we're done. This is actually require us to do a little more negotiation than we have in the past of our earnings. And there's nothing wrong you asking for your earnings, okay? Your compensation. So therefore, 258, while I know the intention for that is helpful, but if I was a seller, put myself in the seller's shoes, I'm a little hesitant giving you the full compensation without even seeing the package. So, and yes, everybody wants to make more money. I get it. But at the same time, it is a thought on the seller. 259, let's look at that. So we changed the title from broker compensation to a buyer broker compensation. Back to 258 really quick, just because the other agent don't sign that form, does not mean you won't show the property because some agents are afraid that they might be steering. My thing is that you guys will know all the ins and out of that contract before it's binding, right? So therefore, buyers are aware whether or not they're gonna have to pay you the compensation if the price agreed upon is where only seller contribute 2 bananas, and now the buyer needs to do a 1 banana with you. Okay, so once again, please don't refuse your property because you don't have that sign back. I can tell you right now, some seller refuse to sign, it's not the selling agent always. And sometimes it may be just timing issues. And you might be missing a good opportunity for your buyer if you decided not to, or you discourage your buyer from seeing it because you don't know what the compensation is. Alan, you got feedback on that? You look
I
like
do,
you want.
I do already. Yeah, yeah. We're seeing where there's parts of the state where like the old school way of doing business is still really, really prevalent. There's all sorts of places around the state where compensation is still shared. I'm gonna give you, the seller, I'm gonna give you 10 bananas. You're gonna keep 5 bananas. You're gonna share 5 bananas, and we're seeing where all over the state that's still being done in a lot of cases. We have other places, especially inside the perimeter and in the Atlanta area, predominantly where we have where the sellers are not offering anything. Doesn't mean the sellers aren't going to pay, but the sellers aren't offering any kind of compensation. And so but at the end of the day, as a buyer's agent, our compensation is paid for and guaranteed by the buyer.
Right.
So this becomes an affordability issue for our buyers. And so for the sellers, we want to make sure they understand that. We just don't want to be caught in the middle steering someone away from a property that's not offering compensation, because then we're not doing our due diligence. The buyer's already on the hook here because we're having a lot of instances where we still have a lot of listing agents that never answer their phone, that won't
Yeah.
respond to you. They won't send F-250, F-258, F-259. They won't do anything. And so at that point, like we're including our compensation as part of the purchase and sale, generally speaking, out there. So I do believe at some point we're going to see this thing break apart where because our sellers have the ability to either pay us or pay the broker, we'll say 10 bananas and the broker shares it, or the sellers can say, I'm going to pay you 5 bananas and I'm going to pay and I'm going to I'll pay the buyer's agent what they, will negotiate that, or we're going to make that offer of compensation. The only thing I do want to say about that is, as listing agents, I want to strongly, strongly encourage you to negotiate your compensation more so than you negotiate the compensation for your for the total compensation. Just because we've had instances where agents have shot themselves in the foot, and so we had that actually happen here in our brokerage, where we had our agent was representing the buyer. They had a buyer brokerage agreement signed, and that buyer group brokerage agreement stated that they were going to be compensated 3%. They found a property, and the property was offering 2%. They went in, submitted their offer. Well, come to find out, the listing agent had negotiated for 4% total compensation. So our agent submits their offer with a full 3% compensation, and they counter back and said no, 2%. And at that point, the seller and the listing agent are basically trying to dictate what the buyer's agent can be paid. We said we were going to pay you 2. That's all we're going to pay. And the seller has that right to do that. However, it became an affordability issue for the buyer. The buyer didn't want to come out of pocket for that extra 1%. So they resubmitted their offer and said, look, it's 3% or we're going to walk. And so the listing agent called our agent and tried to belittle them and said, look, we said we're only offering 2%. And you just need to change your compensation. Tried to push our agent around, and we came back and said, here's the offer. If your seller doesn't want to accept it, then they don't have to accept it, but this is the offer. So it gets submitted to the seller, and the seller goes back to their listing agent and said, look, I said I pay 4%, so if you pay them 3, then you get 1. And so that listing agent was angry because they had negotiated in a total of 4% compensation. And so that, there's a lot of changes on these forms, but really where I want us to be able to have this kind of conversation is because it's in how this thing is really playing out in the trenches in our negotiating with our buyers and with our sellers. We're seeing where this is a big conversation that we're having to have with our buyers. The big conversation now is, look, you're on the hook all the way for all of our compensation. Bonuses is a big conversation that we're having to have for the way we submit offers with compensation, the way that we negotiate with our sellers. These are the big deals here. So the forms are how we're going to get how we're going to carry that out, but like being ready to have these more challenging conversations, because when you as a listing agent negotiate total compensation if it's less than, honestly, if it's less than, well, if it's, I'm trying to
Okay.
avoid talking
So what are you
compensation. So
trying to say,
there
as a
isn't a
seller's
standard, there is no
agent?
set compensation, that kind of thing. But it's just one of those where be careful when you negotiate total compensation, because you as the listing agent and the days of us as listing agents to be able to say, this is all we're going to pay. It used to be we'd throw out and say, okay, we're offering 2, we're offering 2.5, we're offering 3, whatever. And by and large, the buyer's agents normally went with that to a large degree. It was pretty rare when someone came back and said no. Now that's not the case, because everyone has a buyer brokerage agreement signed prior to showing now. That buyer's on the hook, that becomes an affordability issue for the buyer. So just be careful that we don't put ourselves in that situation. So thanks for letting me interject, Ming. I'll hush again.
Don't worry. So bottom line, make sure when you negotiate your compensation, you're negotiating for you, not the other party. Okay? Do inform the seller that the other party may be asking for a certain percentage, because that's how they shoot, that's their fee and for the buyer. And at the end of the day, it's about affordability. And right now with interest rate the way it is right now, affordability is a true issue. It's unlike during pandemic where the interest rate was really low and, you know, the monthly payment was incredible. So now that's not the case. So let's talk about F-259 really quick. So we changed the title from broker compensation to buyer broker compensation because once again, this is all about the buyer broker compensation. The seller agent already had their compensation in already. So we eliminate a paragraph regarding seller broker compensation here. So because this is not about seller broker compensation, this is about buyer broker, okay? So compensation of buyer broker and who's paying for it, okay? So if you, the buyer agent, do not know who's paying for it, whether it's co-op or paying directly from the seller, I have seen people put seller or seller broker on this section right here, okay? But just remember, if the seller's paying for it, you gotta have a signature on that 259, otherwise it doesn't fly, okay? So this is why communication with the selling agent is very important to know who's paying for it. But if you can't get any communication, 9 out of 10, I would just put seller and make sure, or seller broker, but make sure you have a signature on the second page, okay? Right here, it talks about composition shared by seller broker. So you wouldn't know that unless you had a conversation. So if you don't know, once again, make sure you put in that percentage. 9 out of 10, you'll get it. All right. The other one is, I'm not gonna go too long from this point. F-255, we just add some check boxes for clarity and what have you. Even though you have 259, the attorney may ask for 255 because this is like a summary for them to disperse. So while 259 talks about what exactly compensation for the buyer agent is, the broker, but it doesn't talk about what a seller compensation is. So therefore, they may ask you to do F-255 as a summary for attorney purpose. All right. And once again, first page is about who's paying, what's the compensation amount. And the second page is about if you're doing any rebates or obtaining any commission bonuses. Okay. But other than that, the special SIP 620, I just want you guys to know this is important if you don't want to do exhibit, because unless exhibit is executed, it doesn't count. It's considered a counter offer. Okay, so if you don't have that signed, and the agent said, the selling agent said, hey, Ming, I just sent over a signed contract to you. Will you go ahead and bind it? Well, Ming got in a hurry, she was driving, and therefore she didn't look at, she saw the purchase and sale, saw the signature, financing, she saw the signature in that, but I neglect to look at F-259. Well, that's a counter offer, and I was told to bind it, and I did. Guess what? My compensation may not be there. So some agents do prefer use special SIP 620. If you're gonna use it, please use one that's been given. One thing that Seth Weisman did talk about was that you may want to put this language in here, okay? This special step can only be modified with prior written consent of seller and buyer broker, and any attempt to modify the same shall be null and void. Buyer broker shall be expressed third party. We have to tell them that we're the third party beneficiary of this agreement to enforce its right to the compensation above. This special step shall survive the closing if compensation is not paid full in closing. So once again, this will survive closing. Hopefully you guys will have that all resolved prior to closing. If not, it's hard to get money from people after closing, because what do you have to do? You have to take them to civil court and sue them for it. So once again, make sure you get all these done properly before closing. With that said, that is pretty much what I would like to discuss. My topic was today, Mastermind, your compensation, how to get it. And I'm open for anybody in reference to a specific question at this time, concerns or thoughts. Neil, you got any comments in reference to this?
No, I'm good. I think it's more than ever a time to pay attention to detail. I mean, that's just all there is to it. It's anytime something changes, we work out of habits. I know I'm a very habit oriented person. If it's part of my schedule, I'm pretty good about making sure it gets done. You throw something in that's not part of my schedule, if I'm not really paying attention, it doesn't get done. So I think, a lot of us are accustomed to doing business one way and assuming everybody's on the same page. Well, now there's more pages to make sure you're on the right one together. So that's just my biggest takeaway is read everything, because we know agents don't always read everything, but read and be sure. And it only takes that one time, like the example you gave, where you get your compensation cut. Well, then that's a costly lesson, but sometimes that's what it takes. Is experience is the best teacher. So, and it can happen to any of us. It can happen to me. I mean, I've been doing it for years, but if I'm not paying attention, I could miss something. So,
Absolutely. Hey, Keisha, what you got, girl? You gonna mute yourself?
Hey, good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
I just want to throw in here also being careful. I just had a transaction where I was representing the buyer with Open Door. They provided compensation, but they had it stipulated for it to come out of what they were giving the buyer for closing costs.
Yep.
So we ran into the problem with it taking the buyer over the allotted concessions from the lender. So they could only receive so much money, and that took them over. So I don't know if you know, Open Door has this stipulation, whereas if they run out of money, it goes back to the seller. So then you have to be careful about your compensation there because there was nowhere for it to go. So it really took the buyer's concessions down from like 14,000 to like 2,000 because they had to take my compensation out of there.
Mhm.
So luckily and thankfully, they did agree to put the compensation back on their side as the seller. So it worked out, but you still have to be careful about, again, the wording and how it's put because the buyer then lost all of their actual closing costs
Yep.
in order to pay me, and they really didn't get anything. But like I said, thankfully, they did agree to it, in the end to put it back on their side. But that's another thing that we're going to have to, like be careful and pay attention to is exceeding the concessions on the buyer side too.
And just to top that off really quick, most your lenders will allow agent compensation. Let's say, for example, FHA, we know is 6%, right? The maximum contribution you can have. So you can actually have contribution above that and specify what's above that is for a buyer broker compensation, because that is now separated from the maximum. Most lender knows that. Now, I can't say all lenders are equal. Some don't. Meaning, let's say, for example, if your max on a $3,000 is 6% is 18,000. Okay, let's say your compensation, and the buyer needs all $18,000. But in the way the contract's written, I mean, it was for another 3%, okay, for your compensation. So instead of 18,000, you wrote in for a $27,000 closing cost or sell concession. So you can actually break that 3% with the lender saying that 3% is my compensation. Even though it's a closing cost, but it should not be counted as a closing cost. That's a compensation from seller on behalf of buyer for that benefit. Okay, so most your lender knows that, but there are some that doesn't understand it. And sometimes not all lenders are equal because some of them won't do it. Okay, because their company policy, but it is doable. But like Keisha said, we have run the past where some of our agents are very successful negotiating all these closing costs for the buyer. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize that I can't exceed X amount of percentage based on this loan. And so what I told them, say, then you can take that concession and reduce the sale price. There's more than one way doing this. You just gotta be creative about it. At the end of the day, the buyer does get benefit, and honestly, seller can actually buy down on points as well. So this is about negotiating effectively, which for your client for the maximum benefit for your client. So, but good one, Keisha.
One other thing that I know that with the way that the forms changes have brought about, one of the big things that we are still seeing a challenge for a lot of folks is that we have to get buyer brokerage agreements signed in advance. And so one of the habits I think that we're seeing where the successful agents right now, one of the big habits that's happening is they are setting appointments with a buyer beforehand. The days of just like, I'll see you at the house at 2, those are really going by the wayside, because you can do a 1-day buyer brokerage agreement. You can do short term or only for this property in order to stay compliant. But is that really what you're going to do to build a relationship with someone? Like anytime that I bring somebody in and we sit down and we go through, this is how I do real estate. These are all the services I provide. This is what the process looks like. This is all the fees I charge here, and we sign a buyer brokerage agreement. At that point, you're my client for life, right? Like I own you now. I don't mean that in a bad negative way or anything like that, but like we have a relationship now. We're going to be able to work together, and like this is a good buyer. At this point, I know this person is going to buy a house maybe next week, maybe next month, maybe 3 months, but they're my client now. When I just meet somebody at a house, that's not the same kind of relationship. And so this is one of those things where like some folks are disgruntled about a lot of the changes, and some of them are a pain in the butt that we have to swim through. But a lot of these, like we're seeing where some folks are really, really succeeding because they've learned how to work inside this new environment. Just like, things are always changing in real estate. This is just another one of those things. So,
And your adaptability and your flexibility to this industry is what's going to keep you swimming upstream. So please don't think this is really, it's not a hardship. It just change your habit and also make you a much better negotiator down the road.
anybody else have any kind of questions, or like now's the time? I mean, you got a whole mess of brokers on here with you, kind of thing. So if you have any kind of questions that you guys like to throw out there, like we're here for you.
Okay.
Think that's it. All right.
Thank
Well,
you
we
all
love
very much
y'all.
for attending and start your Monday with our mastermind.
So thanks, guys. We appreciate it. Y'all have a
Have a
great
great
week.
day.
Happy New Year's and the whole 9 yards. Hope your Christmas is great. We love y'all.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.